Welcome back to the Planting Roots podcast. I'm Stephen Partain, one of the pastors of Grace Community Church in New Orleans, Louisiana. This week we'll be in Isaiah chapter 7, verses 18 through Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 1. And the question for us is this, and this is a good question for us to think about. Where are we to turn in times of trouble? Where can we find guidance when we think that there's no way out? There's no opportunity for redemption. So last time in chapter 7, verses 1 through 17, we learned about King Ahaz and the Assyrian problem that he had, that ultimately he was going to be invaded by the Assyrians and others that were coming his way to put pressure on him to listen to them, to do what they wanted him to do, to be a part of their coalition against the Assyrians. And so in this context, he felt like he had no way out, nowhere to go. Well, unfortunately for him, things are not going to get any better. We come to chapter 8 and verse 1, and we see that the Assyrian invasion is simply going to happen. And it's going to happen, and actually we see through the naming of Isaiah's son, we see that there's simply no way out. There's nowhere else to go. And so we get to chapter 8 and verse 1, we read the following together. Yahweh said to me, "Get yourself a big panel and write on it in ordinary letters, for plunder hurries and loot rushes. I invoked as trustworthy witness for me Uriah the priest, and Zechariah ben Jeberechiah. I had sex with a prophetess, and she got pregnant and gave birth to a son. Yahweh said to me, call him plunder, hurries, and loot rushes, because before the boy knows how to call father and mother, someone would carry off Damascus' wealth and Samaria's plunder before the king of Assyria." So he's having these sons, he's having children. And what God is saying is that as his children are born, the name he's giving them is showing that the destruction is coming. He said, before they can even say father and mother, what's going to happen? Someone will carry away the Damascus wealth and Samaria's plunder before the king of Assyria. That there's going to be an invasion of Syria and of Israel, right? That Syria and Israel are going to be taken over by the Assyrians. That ultimately things are not going to get better, but they're getting worse. And it's not just going to be Israel, but also the kingdom of Judah. So in verses 5 through 10, we see that same thing, that God is simply going to allow this to happen. This is going to be something that's going to take over his people. And so if you're at this time, right, if you're a person in Israel, you simply want to avoid this destruction, right? This is not something that you want to be involved in. And so in chapter 8, verses 11 through 15, we see Judah wants to be prepared for the invasion. How can they deal with this? And it reads like this: "For the Lord spoke thus to me with a strong hand and instructed me, I should not walk in the way of this people, saying, do not say a conspiracy concerning all that this people call a conspiracy, nor be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. The Lord of hosts, him you shall hallow. Let him be your fear. Let him be your dread, and he will be as a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, as a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them shall stumble. They shall fall and be broken, be snared and be taken." So he's telling them that simply they need to trust in God. Let him be their fear. Let him be their dread. That this has been part of their problem. That their fear has not been in the right place. They've not been respecting and waiting on the God who can actually redeem them and can save them. And so for them, this is where they look for their guidance and for their deliverance. And this is a theme that Isaiah continually is going to hit on the people of Israel. That when it comes to deliverance, it comes to seeing their lives be restored, they can't just be people that speak the words of God, but they have to live the word of God. And so in this moment, we see that Assyria is coming, and there's really nothing they can do about it. Right? They've created the environment. They've been a part of this sin and the brokenness that has led to God allowing this to happen. And so Isaiah has a difficult job because he tells them what they need to do, but he knows that they're simply unwilling to do it. We might ask, why does Isaiah do this? Well, he does this because it's God's calling on his life to speak truth and to be one who helps guide those eventually back to who God is. That some prophets are called to speak truth and see restoration, but some are called to speak truth and as the destruction happens to point people back to God. So I encourage you, as we keep walking through these 5-minute segments in Isaiah, to spend time in these chapters, to dig into all of the places that are talking about Assyria and the armies that are happening here, and to find out more about who God is and why Isaiah is his prophet. Thanks for being a part of this section of Isaiah and walking with us. Hope to see you next time on the Planting Roots podcast.